Well, in case you didn't know this, our music director, Chad, he's on vacation on his way back now with his family, and we had the honor of having our guest band today, Unbroken Light, with us, who traveled to be with us today and lead us in a time of worship. So can we give it up for them being with us this morning? Thank you, guys. Always good to have them when they're here. And today I got some good news and bad news personally to share with you. This probably doesn't affect your life, but it affects mine in a big way. I'm going to start with the good news because I'm a very optimistic person. So the good news is my wife and I, we finally bought a house here in Mechanicsville, and we are so excited about that. It's taken like 5 years of long prayer and offers and all that stuff, but we're excited about that. The bad news that comes along with that is that we have to pack and move. And if anybody has done that recently, it is awful, right? Like that is a horrible experience. And so we started doing this and preparing for moving. And most of us, I try to save money when I can. So I went and I picked up some trash bags for our move to start throwing some stuff away. But, I bought the tight-wad trash bags, right? And if there's anywhere to skimp on money, it's not trash bags, right? You can save on your budget everywhere else, but I have recently come to find out that I probably should have bought some better trash bags because my wife, Lord help her, she likes to pack trash bags as full as they can, and I didn't know that we owned any bowling balls, but apparently we do because every trash bag feels like they're 50 pounds heavy, right? And I go to pick them up, and this is what happens. They rip and tear, and you guys know this, right? Stuff goes everywhere. So I have made a complete mess in our rental home right now, trying to clean it up and get it ready for us to move into our new house. And so a lot of our house looks like this right now. We have hundreds of these laying around the house, getting ready to throw some away, pack some, all that stuff. But as I was packing and getting ready for this move, I looked at these trash bags and I began to think about the message today and where we're going with our next psalm that we're going to look at. And it made me think a lot about you and me and the lives that we live. And let's be honest, sometimes we make a mess of our lives, don't we? There are some things that we wish that we didn't, absorb into our lives. There's some decisions we made we wish we could take back. There's some things that have caused some damage in our lives, maybe from our past or our present right now. Maybe there's some things that we're not proud of. And let's be honest, those things get heavy, don't they? They weigh us down. And you and I, what we do is we carry these things around every single day. These bad decisions, the shame, the guilt of things that we've done or have been done to us. And a lot of times we just think that this is how life is, right? That we have to carry this stuff around day in and day out. And for some of you, you may know or have a relationship with God and you know the benefits of following God and what He can do in your life and help you with this mess. But a lot of us, if we haven't had that experience to see what God can do in our lives, we think we're ultimately in control of this and we have to carry this around every day. And the more bad decisions we make or the things that happen to us in life, the heavier that this load gets. And I don't know where you are at in your life today or what you're carrying around, but I know that this stuff can get heavy. This stuff can be hard to deal with every single day and every single week. And so what do we do when life gets heavy? What do we do when things that have happened to us or that we've done that we're not proud of, or maybe that we've turned away from God? What do we do in those moments where we're carrying this stuff around every single day? Well, the great thing is, as we jump into the Bible today, we're going to learn what God tells us to do when these things come into our lives and how we can ultimately not have to carry this around every single day. And so there's some good news for us today if this is where you find yourself in life. But before we get there, let me just say welcome. Thanks for being at Atlee today. My name is Trey. I'm so glad that you're here, whether you're here in Mechanicsville, you're watching online, you're in Scottsville today. It was great. I got to see our Scottsville family this weekend at the parade there in Scottsville. Y'all did a great job with your float, and it was so good catching up with you. And wherever you find yourself today, I do hope that you find this place to be a safe place for you. A place that you could come and experience God in your life. And if this is your first time with us, wherever you're at, thanks for entrusting us with your church experience today. I know it can be hard or awkward to watch online or jump into a church building for the first time, but I hope today that you find something of benefit for your life and your relationship with God while you're here at Atlee with us over the next few moments. And we've been in this series called Summer in the Psalms. Has everybody had a good summer so far? Maybe you had a good weekend celebrating 4th of July, yeah? Good. About half of you. The other half, you're still working on it, right? Still hoping summer gets a little better. Well, I hope that you continue to have a good summer. But while you're here with us, we're in this Old Testament book in our Bible called Psalms. And as you look in this Old Testament book, it's full of wisdom and poems and things about God for us to glean for our lives. And we've studied a whole bunch of those already. You've heard from different speakers and different topics. And today, we're going to open up to our next psalm today that we're going to look at. And we're literally going to go verse by verse to see what God has to say to us today as we jump into this ancient passage. And if you want some other stuff to follow along with, we have a summer reading plan that's out in our lobby at our Connect desk. It's in front of the green wall there. You can pick one of those up, and you can actually read daily along with us during this series. And also on the wall out there are some other things to help you really understand the Psalms better. So take advantage of those things while you're here. But if you have a Bible or a Bible app, you can go ahead and open up. We're going to look at Psalm 32 today. Is going to be the passage of Scripture we're going to study. And as we do this, I want you to think about whatever load that you're carrying today, because the guy that wrote this is a guy named David. And he had just made some mistakes that made his life feel very heavy. And he's writing looking back on those mistakes in his relationship with God when life wasn't going well and he did some things that he wished he didn't do, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And so David writes about what he experiences in his relationship with God. And as we read this ancient passage, I hope that you glean something about God and your relationship with him and the load that you're carrying today, no matter how heavy it may feel, what God can do. And I love how David starts this passage. He starts in a very positive viewpoint. He talks about what God did in his life, and then he works backwards. So we're going to kind of start at the end of the movie, and we're going to work our way back towards the beginning to see how all this took place. So if you got a Bible, Psalm 32. If you don't have a Bible, we're going to throw it up on the screen here for you. And here's what it says in verse 1. It says, "Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven." Everybody say forgiven. That's an important word we're going to learn today. Blessed are the ones whose transgressions or mistakes or sins or guilt are forgiven, whose sins are covered. He continues in verse 2, says, "Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in those spirit is no deceit." So he opens this passage up saying, hey, here's what God can do in your life if you allow him to. And what he says is that you can be forgiven. And then he talks about what it really looks like to be forgiven of those things. And so I want you real quick to think about what it would look like for all the things that you're carrying to be wiped away, to be forgiven completely. How would that make you feel? How would that make you respond to God if God could do that in your life? And here's what David says it did for him in his life. If you look on the back wall here, the word forgiven, David begins to tell us what that could look like. And it simply means this: when David said that there's no more guilt, that he's not holding on to this guilt of the bad things that he did. Then also that means that he's covered, that God covers those mistakes that he made. He doesn't have to live with them any longer. And then lastly, he can come out of hiding. He doesn't try to hide those things from God anymore or hide those things from everybody else. He just simply says, hey, I messed up. There's some mistakes that I've made, and there's some things that I've learned from those mistakes, and these are the things that God has done in my life. He's removed the guilt. He's covered those things, and then now I don't have to hide in those things anymore. And this weekend, we're celebrating freedom, right? Think about the idea of how free that's got to feel, for that weight and these things to be completely forgiven of them and then be wiped away. It'd be like today if I took this TV and I put your name at the top and I wrote down all the things in your life and in my life that we've done wrong. No one would want to see that, right? Like, you wouldn't want that displayed for anybody else. But that's what we live with every day. And then just imagine God just wiping it clean, it disappearing. You'd be like, how can you do that, God? Like, how can you get rid of those things? I've lived with those things for so long, and man, they're heavy and they're awkward and no one likes them. But David tells us this is the God that we can serve. This is the God who came to help us. And so today, if you have things in your life that you're like, nobody could ever forgive that. Nobody even knows about this part of my life. The cool thing is today is that I think you and I should heed David's advice, is that we can go to God and receive the forgiveness that he offers. And so now let's backtrack. Let's figure out how David got to that point, because obviously he didn't start there. He had these things that were weighing him down, that were hard to deal with, and he experienced God's forgiveness. But let's learn how David actually received God's forgiveness. Here's the beginning of after David made these mistakes, and a lot of these things cost him a lot. And he finally gets to rock bottom and he says, God, I need you. But here's where it all began. So let's look in verse 3 as he continues. He says this, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength, it was sapped as in the heat of summer. And a lot of us experienced this over the last few weeks, like how hot it was, how miserable it was. And David is talking about this idea that he was groaning and that it was heavy and that he didn't like living this way. And all the things that he had done and all the things that had been done to him, he's like, man, God, like I can't keep living this way. And the cool thing is he realized he wasn't designed to live that way. And so that's what ultimately led him into going into more of a deeper relationship with God. And he wants us to know how he got there to receive that forgiveness. And so over here, we got forgiveness, right? But let's look at over here what David had to go through. He had this idea of he was silent in his sin, as he describes it, is that he just kept quiet. He just was living this miserable life. All of these mistakes that he had done, they started to feel like his life was wasting away. Ever feel like that sometimes, where it's just another day? Man, I don't know if I can bear the weight of this any longer. That's where David was at. And then he says that it was heavy. Not only the heaviness that God, he felt like from his shame and pain that he was dealing with, that he had disappointed God, but also the people that he had disappointed, the things that he had done wrong, all that he wished he could go back and fix and redo. It was heavy. And then it led to him hiding. It led to him isolating himself in his own misery. And it's funny, if you look throughout the Bible story, isn't that how everything happened in the beginning, right? Like God had created mankind and all of a sudden sin enters the world. And Adam and Eve, the first thing that they do when they experience this sort of shame and guilt and sin, they go into hiding. And it's been like that ever since. This guy, David, did that. He hid and tried to be away from all the mistakes that he had made. And let's be honest, you and I, we do the same thing, don't we? Whenever we feel like we're not worthy enough or that we've done something that we're not proud of, we hide, we isolate, we live in silence to our sin. And it's heavy. And we really feel like there's no hope. And this is a hard place to be, isn't it? And we've all had these moments where we've been there and we're like, man, why did I do that? I knew that wasn't good for my life. I knew that wasn't going to help, but man, I just wanted something to give me this momentary satisfaction. But at the end, it pulled me away from my relationship with God, and it pulled me away from the life that I wanted. And none of us like to be here. And David reminds us that the great thing about God is that we don't have to stay stuck here. That there's a better life that God designed us to live, and that is to live in his forgiveness and freedom. But how do we get there? How did David go from here to here? What did that look like for him to go from fully experiencing this freedom and fully experiencing this forgiveness, but dealing with being silent in his sin? Well, the cool thing is he kind of gives us a blueprint of how it went from there. And this is what he said after that, the idea that after he stayed silent in his sin, verse 5, here's what he says. He says, then I acknowledged my sin to you, talking to God, and did not cover up my iniquity. What he says, I just got real with God. I said, you know what? Enough's enough. God, here's what I've done. Here's the mistakes I've made. He laid it all out on the table. And he said, I will confess my transgressions, my mistakes, my sins to the Lord. And you forgave the guilt of my sin. Wow, right? So here he is in this moment, everything's going wrong, and he's like, I have nowhere else to turn. I guess I'll go to God and I'll just confess it all and get it. And what he thought was maybe he would experience some shame from God, or maybe some lightning bolt from heaven, for what he did. But he experienced the opposite. He experienced forgiveness that he couldn't muster up himself, or he couldn't pretend or stay in hiding. Like, he actually was forgiven from God for all the things that he had done. Once he fessed up, he realized something about God's forgiveness that he had yet to experience. And so what does that look like for you and I? How do we experience that forgiveness when we've done stuff wrong? And David gives us the antidote to that, and he says this: all we have to do is confess. And so in order for go to here to here, there's this part in the middle where it's this confession to God, this being honest and real with God. And maybe for some of us, we didn't know we could do that, right? We didn't know that we could go to God and be that vulnerable or real to him. But David says, no, that's where healing starts. And what did he do? He acknowledged his sin. He's like, God, I messed up. God, I blew it here in life. And then after that, after he acknowledged it, he stopped hiding. He just got it all out there, and he could be real again. And then lastly, he confessed his wrongdoings. He just threw it out there to God. And I think there's something very healthy and therapeutic about stopping it, keeping that stuff inside and getting it out. But not just getting it out or writing it down, but really going to our Creator, the one who made us and knows us better than we know ourselves, and saying, God, I need you. God, I can't handle this load by myself anymore. And God, I know ultimately that you are the one that can forgive me and give me a better life. And then after that, he gives us a closing statement, because he doesn't want us just to experience this once. He wants us to know that this is available 24/7, because he knows David isn't like going to leave there and never make a mistake again, right? Like, confess it, feel better. Okay, good, I'm going to be perfect from now on. No, that's not how life works, does it? Because you and I, we're sinful people. We mess up like on an hourly basis, right? But the cool thing is that God is there for us every moment of every time, no matter what we're dealing with or what we're struggling with. So if we feel alone in something, if we feel like we've lost hope, today I hope you realize there's a God who loves you and wants to walk with you through whatever mess that you've made for yourself, or whatever mess you find yourself in life that life has given you. And here's what David says if you want to keep following God and you want to stay forgiven. Here's some advice that he gives as he continues this passage. He says, therefore, after everything you've just learned, after you've experienced forgiveness, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. And so here's what he says about God in these moments, is that God is there for him and that God can be there for you as well. And he gives us three big things for us to think about when we find ourselves in these moments, to keep from going back to those sinful things that just destroy our lives. And so that we can know that we don't have to return to those things. We can experience forgiveness and we can stay there. And here's what he says that we should do in those moments. First, that we should pray. We should pray first. And this is kind of like backwards of how you and I do life, because what do? We mess up, we fall short, and then we just throw up that Hail Mary prayer at the end like, God, please forgive this mess that I've got myself in. I will follow you all the days of my life, God, if you could just get me out of the jam that I'm in, right? That's how a lot of our prayers are. But what David instructs us to do is to pray first. Hey, God, do you think it's a good idea that I go hang out with those people tonight? God, I want to really know. Give me the wisdom. Should I do that? Hey, God, is it wise for me to buy that thing right now? God, I know I really am not in a good place to do that, and I just want to know what you think. Hey, God, I've been doing this for so long. Is this really the right way to be living my life? You see what happens when we pray first? We kind of put ourselves in a better posture, one, to understand what God wants for our life, but two, it can help talk us out of some really stupid things that you and I can convince ourselves that they're the best ideas in the world. When we pray first, we acknowledge God's wisdom over our own wisdom. And it's in those moments where we get to see God show up and show us how to weigh those decisions better. And so when you're facing something in life, pray first. Go to God. Ask him for his wisdom and see what he would reveal to you about those decisions and about those choices. And I promise you, it will help you in life get to a better place, and it's not you doing everything by yourself. The next thing that he tells us in there is to seek God's comfort, to seek God's comfort. Because a lot of times when we've made mistakes or life just comes at us and it gets messy and heavy, we try to go to all kinds of other things for comfort. And we've been to those things and we've done those things, and we know that they may provide a little comfort for a little bit, but we know that they're fleeting. Those relationships that we get ourselves in where we're like, this person's gonna fix me and make me feel so much better, only to realize like 48 hours later that they're just as human and messed up as we are, and realize that they can't fully satisfy us. Or maybe it's those vices that we go to. Maybe it's the drinking or the drugs or the pills, or even if it's not extreme as those things, but some of those things, we like that momentary comfort from them. But in those moments, have we ever fully been satisfied by those things? No, they end up leaving us worse than when we went to them. But here, David's saying, listen, I've gone to everything for comfort, but I can tell you the thing that brings me the most comfort is going to my Creator, going to God who can actually give me the real thing that can help me with what I'm dealing with. And if you're dealing with tough stuff right now, stop going to all the other things that you know aren't going to help you, and go to God and watch him give you comfort that you've never experienced before. And then lastly, he says this, is to follow God's guidance. Follow God's guidance. So when God tells you something, or you know something isn't good for you, follow God's guidance. We talked about this last week when we were looking at Psalm 23, this idea that God leads us on a better path for our lives. Stop going down paths that we know aren't going to be helpful, and watch when you follow God's guidance, when you pray to him, do what he actually says. Do what he says, and see if it doesn't lead to a better way. David got firsthand experience about what this was going to look like for himself, and he encourages us to do the same. And so if you want to stay forgiven, if you don't want to go back to that silence and sin, this is a great place to start. Pray first, seek God's comfort, follow his guidance. And then he leaves us like one last little conclusion here for us to really think about. And I want you to think about this as well. And he says this about our lives. He says, do not be like the horses or the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. And then he continues by saying this, many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds those, the one who trusts in him. And so when we lean on God, when we stop going down those wrong paths, what we find about God is his unfailing love just surrounds us, takes over, shows us a better life. It helps us be self-controlled. He talks about don't be like horses and mules who just run off and do whatever they want. That kind of life isn't going to be beneficial for you. But if you are controlled by God, allowing him to lead your life, you don't have to worry about going off into those other things. Allow God to be the one that you continue to find your source of comfort and wisdom from, and just trust. Trust in those moments when you got to make the hard decision. Am I going to go my way, or am I going to go God's way? That God's way is going to be better. That it may not be easy. You still may have to walk through some hard stuff. You still may have to do the earthly things, right, of forgiveness and the tough conversations. But that way leads towards healing. The other way leads towards destruction. And so many of our lives have been so full of just that heavy mess for so long that it's time for us to experience God's love and forgiveness and ultimately his grace more and more in our lives. And then lastly, I love this part because once we experience God's forgiveness in our lives, here's what he tells us should follow that. He says, rejoice in the Lord and be glad. You righteous, sing, all you who are upright in heart. He tells us, listen, if you've been forgiven, you better celebrate that. You better understand how good you got it, because there are people walking around with this heavy mess. And once you realize that this isn't the life that God gave you to live and that he's wiped your slate clean, he's forgiven you, you should be like, thank you, God. And so many of us, we've been Christians for a little while, if you've been following Christ, and sometimes we're just like, yeah, it's good, another day in church, another day following God. I may wake up and read my Bible. It's like, no. Once you realize how good you got it, you better wake up and follow God with your life. You better understand how good you got it, because God has done a work of miraculous being in your life, and you better celebrate that and rejoice in that. And too many of us are Christians, we're just walking around like, yep, just another day. And it's like, no, I'm forgiven today. God has got rid of my mess. I don't got to walk around with that anymore. I am different. I'm saved. I'm forgiven. I'm healed, whatever it may be. And so many of us, we're just stay stuck. And that's not the life that God created you or me to live. If there's a better life, a life forgiven and set free. And once you realize how good that is, you can't help but rejoice and be excited about it. But it reminds me of a story of my son. We were hanging out this week, and he was like playing his little Switch video game. He had a game on, and he's playing, and my oldest and I, we were wrestling in the living room and having fun. And my youngest, he's gotten stuck on this one game. It's just frustrating him. And so he's like, Dad, this isn't working. And he's like trying to get my attention. And me and my oldest were wrestling and doing, some suplexes on the carpet. And I can't, hear one and, body slam the other. So finally, I get this kid down, and this kid's like, at wit's end at this point. And he's like, Dad, I just can't win. And he walks away, and I was like, uh-oh, we got a scene, It's like, okay, so put this one down, make sure he was still good. I go over to this kid, and I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? I know that you're upset about something. What's happening? And he's like, Dad, you weren't listening to me, and Sawyer wasn't listening to me, and I'm mad. And I was like, I can tell. You're there. And I was like, well, how can I help you? And he's like, I just needed your help. I didn't know how to beat the game, and I was trying to get your attention, but you weren't listening. And I'm like, hey, buddy, I'm sorry. Dad has, very hard time focusing sometimes. Let me help you now, and Bubba will come help you now. We'll get this figured out. And I said, one of the things we say in our family, we say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And so I used that phrase on my son. I was like, hey, Daddy's sorry. Hey, will you forgive me? And he looks at me dead in the eye, and he says, nope. And I was like, you dirty dog. Right? Like, this is supposed to, father-son moment. I thought we were, good. We were tight, and I didn't know I was going to get rejected by a 6-year-old, right? And I was like, okay, didn't see that curveball. All right, so I was like, well, I'm just going to let you, think about that answer for a minute, and I'm going to let you cool down. I know you're upset, and Dad's right here if you need me. And I walk away going, that felt awful, right? That felt awful not to be forgiven. And I think about our relationship with God sometimes, and I think so many of us think the same thing about our Heavenly Father. We think if we go to him and we say, you know what, God, I'm sorry I did all this, that God's going to be like, nope, that's a little too much for me to handle, right? Like, you're not forgiven for that. And that kind of rejection stings. Like, that is not a life to live. But that's not who God is. And that's the opposite of what David got to experience when he brought him stuff to God. He's like, I didn't know how this was going to go. I made some really big, bad decisions in life. But man, he experienced God's unfailing love and forgiveness in his life. And so finally, you're probably wondering, did my son ever, mend this up? Well, he comes to me, and he, after he cooled down for a minute, and he says, hey, Dad, I need to talk. And I was like, okay, I'm glad that you're back, I was like, let's try this again. And he looks at me, and he's like, Dad, I'm sorry I was so mad. Will you forgive me? I was like, sorry, son, I can't do that. You didn't forgive me. I can't forgive you. No, what a horrible person. No, I was like, of course I forgive you. And will you forgive me? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, there we go. That's the answer we were looking for. And there was this mending of this relationship where something had gotten in the way. And for a moment, we got to experience what true forgiveness really feels like again. And it brought me back to when I started going to church and I heard about God and his love and forgiveness in my life. And there's nothing sweeter or better when you know that all the things that you've done wrong and things that you could never repay have been paid for you by a creator who loves you, who sent his son Jesus to die on a cross for every single one of us, no matter how bad we think we are, or how far we think we are from God, or what's gotten in the way, that God's right there, and he wants to forgive you. But sometimes we just got to get off of our stubborn boxes and just say, God, I need you. God, I messed up. And so if there's anything I want you to walk away with from today, it's a very simple truth. You've probably heard it 1,000 times if you've been to church, but it's one thing to hear this. It's another thing to experience this and know it for your own life. And this is this simple truth. God forgives you. And that's what David experienced, that God forgave him. And today I want you to know more than anything else as you leave here today that God forgives you. God forgives your mistakes. He wipes those things clean. And once again, that's a good thing to know, right? Yeah, thanks, God. That's cool. Thank you for that. But let's make it just a tad more personal. And I want you to say this with me so that you can actually hear it for yourself and hear yourself say it. Here's the phrase I want us to say together. Ready? On count of three. 1, 2, 3. God forgives me. Let's say it one more time together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. God forgives me. And that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you today because I think that's all that David was trying to get across in this passage. As he's looking back on his life, he had to experience an unbelievable amount of forgiveness for some things that he thought nobody could ever forgive. And today, if you're feeling heavy, if you've been carrying around this weight of the decisions and the shame and the pain and the guilt and all that stuff today, guess what? You don't have to carry this anymore. And like David says at the end, that he's going to rejoice and be glad, I want us to practice that today as well. So I'm going to invite the band to come back out for a moment. And as we end today's service, I want us to dwell on this thought that God forgives me. And if God forgives me, and I fully know that, and I can fully experience that, then I should be so thankful to a God who came to do that for me. And as we end today's service, I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you've experienced that forgiveness, just to go to God and say, God, thank you for forgiving me. And maybe for you, if you've never had that moment, maybe you've been holding on to this mess for way too long, I want you for a moment just to confess those things. God, I'm sorry. God, I messed up. God, will you forgive me? And I hope today as you do that, that God's grace and peace will meet you right where you're at. Because that's how much he loves you today. That he gave everything so that you and I would experience the incredible freeing gift of his forgiveness in our lives. And so let's just take a moment. Let's not worry about all the stuff that's going on outside of here. And let's just take a moment. Say, God, thank you for forgiving somebody like me. God, today I love you. God, today I trust you. And God, today, no matter what life feels like, I'm going to choose to know that your plan is better. And so let's go ahead and stand for a moment. And as the band sings this song out, I want you just to have a moment with God where you sing this song to him. It's a song that we've sang here at church a lot of times. But I hope today maybe it has just a different meaning and understanding of how good God is. So let's sing this out today. Lord, we need you today in your forgiveness.